Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our first read of The Moon That Turns You Back by Hala Aya. We are reading through this poetry book, and there are some pretty rough topics that are discussed, I think. There's a lot of true to life topics, there's a lot of realism that's portrayed here, which then made me think of the realism of what we're experiencing through our current climate. And I don't know, I guess it's not that related, but I do see, especially in Portland, I see the world around us, and there's always been this sense of disconnection and I guess not fitting in with the people of Portland sometimes.
Are you meaning that we don't fit in, you don't fit in, a certain group doesn't fit in?
No, more just personally. Like, I don't think I feel like I fit in. Not that I even fit in or not, but more just so, like, I don't feel like this place is my home. But recently, with the way the government has gone, and very specifically the character of Elon Musk is doing things,
Blech.
we're starting to notice a change and shift in the consumerism around Tesla, like his major company, right? The result of that has made me realize, in one part, why I think I just feel so disconnected with Portland. And what I mean is, if we look at how people are responding to this, it's not that they're selling their cars, it's not that they're refusing to buy it. Maybe some are, and there are, like, but what I'm seeing more of is people rebranding the car, people renaming it, putting stickers on it that says, "Oh, I bought this before I knew Elon went crazy." And it's like, the politics were always there. He came from apartheid South Africa, from a wealthy family. Like, there's so much trouble that comes out of that person.
Right, and it wasn't just wealth, it was wealth that was stolen.
Right. So I think that's what kind of bothers me about this whole Tesla movement is people are responding like they're trying to cover up what they did, which I get. Like, if I spent money on a Tesla, I wouldn't have the money to buy a new car. So I get that. But also, like, you rebranding it to look like a Honda, it's kind of shady. It's like you're hiding your own deeds to try to cover up what happened.
Right, and I mean, it's one thing to not be proud of it, but it's another, like you said, to be, in a way, trying to be deceptive.
Right. And I think that's what it is Portland seems deceptive. It seems duplicative. Like, one thing is being shown of this super progressive place. And honestly, when you walk around, it doesn't feel progressive sometimes. It feels like a cover up. Like, yeah, people will say, like, "Oh, that person's being racist." Like, but you are being racist in so many other ways by you speaking up for me. Like, you covering up what I have to say. Like, that's also a form of racism.
Yeah.
So I don't know. This whole movement has been interesting. Obviously, what that person has done has warranted the effect of what's happening. But yeah, maybe it's the duplicative nature of people that I don't like. And this is not all Portland, obviously. We have friends, we have very close people here. But there are some that I'm not fond of how they're reacting.
That's fair. Do you feel like it's only a Portland thing, or
No, I'm sure it's everywhere. I think with uprisings and things like that, people are going to try to stand still or not move or cover things up. This probably happened with every movement that's happened. French Revolution, the things in Germany and things like that. But speaking of performers and people trying to perform in Portland, we're going to go to someone that actually is a good performer, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Ashtar Mualim. Ashtar Mualim is a theater and circus trained performing artist and yoga instructor. They are currently touring with their piece called Cosmos. What I appreciate most about Ashtar's work is that it's not only based in historical fact and showing the reality of what's in Palestine as well as in France and in the US, but also being humorous. There's a way that they weave in humor with the serious. You can learn more about Ashtar Mualim on YouTube at Ashtar Mualim. That's ASHTAR and on Instagram at ashtar.mualem.
Yep, and that's going to be our recommendation for the week. All right, so our first read of The Moon That Turns You Back by Hala Alyan. In our first read, we read pages 2 through 49, which included the poetry of interactive fiction How Saints to Fatima Comment Out. I think we discussed this in the past, but poetry is not my forte, so I think Jamae is going to take over most of the conversation about kind of what we're reading and maybe her perspective of how she felt or looked at the pieces.
For sure. Even though poetry is my forte, I think that we can both recognize that reading poetry is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And because of its complexity, we have different strategies in reading it. What were your ways in trying to read through the first portion?
So for me, it was much more of just trying to read through it, not trying to decipher every word, every line, every thought. More just what did it say as it was coming out. Sometimes I would read it out loud because then it sounded different. Like in my mind, I think I had a better concept of the rhythm that maybe she wanted us to get out of it. But that was kind of what I used.
Definitely. So reading it out loud and listening or trying to comprehend the things that popped out at you.
Also, just kind of sitting there and letting it be done. Like not trying to break it down, but just letting the piece come to me rather than me trying to over decipher.
For sure. Letting it speak for itself.
Yeah.
For sure. So taking it at face value and allowing it to be a part of the experience rather than you trying to cut open its organs. For me, I appreciated not only the frankness that I noticed in the poetry, but also reading between the lines, like trying to figure out what is it that the narrator is saying based on the title and what they're saying in the body of the text. So sometimes, and we'll get into this a little later, sometimes the title, for example, says the interviewer wants to know about fashion, but it mentions nothing about fashion, but it does talk about some dialogue of some sort. So trying to read between the lines of what does it mean that this interviewer wants to know about something that's less important than what the narrator is trying to say. What do you feel like the sounds when you were listening to it and the pacing stirred up in you or gave more openness to?
I don't think I really had any thoughts on it.
Like it didn't feel like soft or hard or...
I think there was probably a mixture of both. Like, I think the frankness or the openness definitely left for a more critical tone, but the overall poetry and how it read didn't feel overly in my face.
Definitely. I felt the same way. I felt like there was a presentation, but not necessarily a forcing of that presentation.
And with that presentation, I feel like I didn't notice this, but you caught some themes in this read.
Yes. Some of the themes that I noticed, at least in this first read, were very much centered around death and the diasporic experience, especially of Palestinians. With death, there was different types of death. There were the attacks on Palestinians, specifically in Palestine, the death of relationships, and the death of unborn children. Did you get any of that in any parts of the read?
I think I understood the parts around death, especially some of the miscarriage talks that were present. There were definitely discussions around Palestine, and it seemed much more from a personal experience of things.
Yes, for sure.
But it seemed like we were opening a book to a journal, and so death was a part of who she was, less so she was presenting what death was.
For sure, what death looked like in her life,
Right.
rather than what death looks like universally.
Right.
But what I appreciate about poetry is that sometimes the more specific you get, the more universally it becomes relatable. For me, in terms of the diasporic experience, Hala looks back on places that she's left. And so for me, I felt like I had a chance to look back in the places that I left, leaving Guam, my parents leaving the Philippines and back and back and back.
Mm-hmm. So within this, were there any specific poems or styles that you found interesting?
Definitely. Some interesting forms that I found were, for example, the poem on page 46 of the physical copy, Key, it had a fill in the blank form. On the left side, it was like a Mad Libs. There were blanks that needed to be filled in. And then on the right side was a key where you can fill in the different words into the different blanks.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the words was Massachusetts, and I had no idea where to put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there were other ones that she used with different styling, the way the poetry looked on the paper, the way that certain poems were coded or blacked out, or kind of signaling what she maybe wanted you to highlight or read versus what not. But there was a lot of interesting presentation, but also stuff that by the naked eye could look confusing.
Right, like the coding on page 43 with the love poem and on page 49 with Fatima coming out. The codes were almost like computer coding, not like HTML, because I would be able to read that, but this one was very specific. So I'm not sure what kind of code it is. For those of you who are coders, let us know in the comments what kind of code love poem was. But with Fatima, instead of using code for the actual poem, it talked about what commenting out meant and the redaction that follows with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Were there any other interesting forms that you found?
No, I mean, I think they were all very different from just standard, like, poetry that I think that I would more read.
Mm,
So it was more confusing and led to much more having to search for the answer.
gotcha.
Sometimes not even getting the answer.
Totally. It was a lot of interpretation.
So then let's kind of go into some of the poems that we enjoyed. What was maybe one of your favorites?
One of my favorites was the first poem of this read, Interactive Fiction, House Saints. And I'd like to give a little excerpt of it. It's broken down into two different parts, and each part has a quote unquote interactive section in which there are three different columns, but those three different columns could be read differently or it could be read all together, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's one prompt, and there are three different lines or columns that you can follow down and get a different story from each one.
Yes, exactly. And you don't necessarily have to read left to right. You could read the middle one and then the one on the left and then the one on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to read the second section of Interactive Fiction House Saints. It reads, The saint sees cinder in the tea leaves. The saint turns a daughter into blue. And the pollution is blue, and the smoke from our mouths is blue, and each new blue is morning. The saint touches the welt and it turns rhinestone. The saint says, Return to your grandmother. She's left the door unlocked. The saint says, Stop this. I'm sorry there is nothing. Crickets outside the window. The dead are not dead. They are pinned to each siren, hot pink, green, white, like beaks to a wire. It is not enough to say love in Arabic. You must say, be the thing that buries me. A door from spackled sky to spackled room. You don't need a house to spread out your rug. Maybe Law's trees and peach trees and a rooster that wakes us every morning. Some animal tongue that turns the clock back to its first hour. When I think about this poem, and at least this portion of it, it reminds me of turning back to something. Like the words themselves make it feel like there's something that we're moving back to rather than moving toward.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the line from that poem, and I remember it even from reading it, but it says, To say love in Arabic, you must say, be the thing that buries me. It's just such a unique perspective on her life in that poem and that culture.
Right. It makes love sound heavier than what many love poems make it out to be.
Right.
What was a poem that stood out to you?
So I think one of the poems that kind of caught my eye was in the physical copy. It was on page 33, and it was My Father Is. So the poem reads, And I'm going to start with the title. I feel like it's a part of it, but
Mm-hmm.
my father is unreturnable. One passport short of country, one country short of citizen. Driving to Texas to surprise me, asking, "Do you remember this song?" Holding up a glass, drunk after years of not calling out, "Live long the king." Grinning like a child's moon, the inkiest kind of green. Setting the story straight. Never stepping foot in Beirut again. Astonished by American graveyards, saying his mother's name, asking if I remember her, afraid of dogs and ocean, afraid of leaving, afraid of not, afraid of nothing. So, for me, the reason why this poem stuck out was even though there was maybe not an extremely close familiarity, it felt very personal and it felt very connected with the immigrant story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like my father, but I think I know her father. Like through
Mm,
my friend's parents, like I think I know of her father and who that father is and the hard worker, the person that gives everything to his family, his daughter. And that's what that poem kind of meant for me, even though I wouldn't be able to tell you the words that were within it.
gotcha, for sure. One last poem that stood out to me was The Interviewer Wants to Know About Fashion, which is on page 14 on the physical copy. It reads, "Think of all the Kaya lilies. Think of all the words that rhyme with Kaya. Isn't it a miracle that they come back? The flowers, the dead. I watch a woman bury her child. How? I lost a fetus and couldn't eat breakfast for a week. I watch a woman and the watching is a crime. I return my eyes. The sea foams like a dog. What's 5,000 miles between friends? If you listen close enough, you can hear the earth crack like a neck. Be lucky. Try to make it to the morning. Try to find your heart in the newsprint. Please, I'd rather be alive than holy. I don't have time to write about the soul. There are bodies to count. There's a man wearing his wedding tuxedo to sleep in case I meet God. And there's a brick of light before each bombing. I dream I am a snake after all. I dream I do Jerusalem all over again. This time, I don't shake my hair down when the soldier tells me to. I don't thank them for my passport. Later, my grandfather said they couldn't have kept it. I don't know what they couldn't do. I only know that enormous light. Only that roar of nothing, as certain and incorrect as a sermon. This is what I was talking about earlier, where the title kind of creates context for the body of text. The body of text to me sounds like the narrator is talking about the things that are more important than fashion. The things that are more important is like all the death that's happening all at once and the possibility of death coming to someone without notice.
hmm I think without being able to get that depth of it, even just the story of what she presents, like I said, her poetry seems like an opening into her private journal and diary. And it talks about her being in some form of way queer. Like it talks about how
Mm,
she looks at women. It talks about her struggle as a female presenting individual going to a place where patriarchy is still the leading class of society, about her having to manage her hair in a certain way and the freedom of being able to break out of that, the
mm.
unknowing and the criminality of her homeland. Like there's so much packaged in that, but seems so light coming from the perspective of her telling that story so shortly.
Yes, definitely. How are you feeling now about moving into the second half of the read?
This is still something that I don't know well. There was a podcast I listened to with Clint Smith, who is a poet, and the way that he described reading poetry and understanding poetry was that you get what you get out of it. It doesn't have to be that you understand every poem, but if you understand one, if something from a poem means something to you, then you have gotten something out of that book. And so that's kind of the way I'm going to continue to approach this. Like, I don't understand the titles being different or the shapes of what the words are putting in,
Mm,
but what I get is stories and the human nature of what I think Hala Alyan is providing.
absolutely. I think that regardless of my being a nerd for poetry, the story is what shines through. And that's kind of what I appreciate about this book is that the story that the narrator is showing, that Hala Alyan is writing, is being very transparent.
Yeah. So we will go into the second part of this read and see what we discover. That second part we'll be reading
Pages 50 to 97, which is Fatima Divorce Court 2 Spoiler.
Yep. And for people that are reading along with us, if you had a favorite poem from this book, or if you have a favorite poetry book or poet that you like to read, feel free to let us know. And you can do that by
emailing us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com or leaving us a message on Instagram at asianbookclubpod.
We also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, where we have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Otherwise, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat. Bye!